We're back with a cold case murder that could finally be solved. Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Dahlia, was brutally murdered and her body meticulously cut in half.
For decades, the Black Dahlia case has been locked in mystery, a brutal 1947 killing that refused to give up its secrets. But now, new evidence is forcing a second look at what investigators may have missed. Hidden clues, overlooked reports, and long-buried details are beginning to resurface. And they don't just raise questions, they challenge everything. Could the truth have been right in front of everyone all along? And if so, why was it ignored? The clue everyone missed for 80 years. For nearly 80 years, the murder of Elizabeth Short has been labeled as one of the most impossible cases to solve. Too tangled, too chaotic, too lost in time. Theories piled up, suspects came and went, and eventually, many accepted that the truth would never be known. But what if that assumption isn't accurate? What if the answers were never truly out of reach? In the early days of the investigation, detectives weren't completely blind. Records suggest they had several promising leads, details that, if handled differently, might have changed everything. There were indications that Elizabeth may have tried to reach out for help shortly before her death. Certain individuals stood out, including one man whose medical background raised unsettling questions about the nature of the crime. Investigators gathered testimonies, tracked movements, and quietly observed potential suspects. And yet, something went wrong. As public interest exploded, the case began to lose direction. Newspapers rushed to publish dramatic headlines, often exposing sensitive information that should have remained sealed. Evidence was mishandled. Some reports were misplaced or forgotten. Witnesses slipped away over time. What began as a structured investigation slowly dissolved into disorder. One figure who repeatedly drew attention was George Hodel. Authorities monitored him closely, even recording conversations tied to him. But just as the focus seemed to tighten, he disappeared from the center of the investigation, leaving behind a trail that was never fully followed. As the years passed, the case transformed into something almost unreal. The name Black Dahlia turned Elizabeth into a symbol, overshadowing the fact that she was a real person, someone searching for opportunity, stability, and a future, someone who may have sensed that something was wrong. And that's where it becomes unsettling, because if recent findings are pointing in the right direction, then this wasn't just an unsolved mystery. It was something overlooked, clues that weren't connected, warnings that weren't taken seriously, a trail that may have been right there, but never fully understood. And now, as forgotten reports and long-buried records begin to resurface, a disturbing possibility starts to take shape. One that suggests Elizabeth may not have been unaware of the danger around her, but desperately trying to escape it. The evidence that came back from the shadows. For decades, the murder of Elizabeth Short seemed frozen in time, sealed under layers of missing files, conflicting statements, and investigative failure. But recently, fragments of forgotten information have begun resurfacing, forcing people to reconsider what was once dismissed as settled history. One of the most disturbing rediscoveries involves an old police encounter report that had quietly vanished from public attention. According to later research, an officer may have interacted with Elizabeth shortly before her death. The description is unsettling: a young woman who appeared anxious, emotionally unsettled, and visibly afraid. If accurate, it suggests she may not have been drifting unknowingly toward danger, but already feeling it close behind her. That single detail reshapes everything. It raises a haunting possibility that she may have tried to seek help, to warn someone, or to escape something she couldn't fully explain. Then another piece entered the picture, one that deepened the mystery instead of solving it. A letter, reportedly written in 1949, surfaced decades later among private belongings. It was allegedly penned by someone claiming inside knowledge of the case and pointed toward a figure identified only by initials: G.H. Many researchers believe this referred to George Hodel, a man long surrounded by suspicion. What made the letter even more controversial were its alleged references to details that were never publicly released during the original investigation. If authentic, it suggests that critical information may have existed outside official records for decades, unseen, unexamined, ignored. And just when the case seemed like it couldn't grow any stranger, another modern twist emerged. A claim involving digital decoding of an old cipher linked a different name back to early suspect lists, reopening old connections investigators once set aside. Each discovery doesn't bring closure. It expands the uncertainty. Because now the question isn't just who did it. It's how much information was already there, waiting, and overlooked. And as these fragments begin to connect in unexpected ways, attention shifts back to the very beginning of the case, the morning everything was discovered, and the moment the mystery first entered history. The moment the Black Dahlia was found. On the morning of January 15, 1947, Los Angeles woke up like any other day, ordinary, calm, and unaware that something unimaginable had already unfolded in the city. Streets were active, businesses opening, children heading out, and life moving forward in its usual rhythm. Nothing suggested that the day would soon be remembered for one of the most horrifying discoveries in American history. In the quiet neighborhood of Leimert Park, a vacant lot sat between growing homes and dusty roads. It looked abandoned, forgotten, just another empty space in a rapidly expanding city. But inside that silence was something no one expected to find. A woman named Betty Bersinger was walking with her young daughter when something unusual caught her attention near the overgrown grass. At first glance, it looked like a discarded store mannequin, lifeless, broken, left behind without care. But something about it felt wrong. The shape didn't sit naturally. The stillness didn't feel artificial. As she moved closer, unease turned into dread. What she thought was trash or debris slowly revealed itself to be something far more disturbing. It was a body. The realization hit instantly, freezing the moment into shock. Within minutes, police flooded the area, sirens breaking the morning calm. Officers set up barriers, photographers arrived, and reporters began circling like vultures, sensing a headline that would soon dominate the nation. The victim was identified as Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman whose name would soon be etched into criminal history forever. By that afternoon, newspapers had already begun shaping the story. Within days, the entire country knew her name, and soon after, the press gave her a label that would define the case forever: the Black Dahlia. But even as the world focused on the discovery, investigators were already noticing something that didn't fit. Because the condition of the body suggested this wasn't random, and the details hinted at something far more deliberate. And as the scene was examined more closely, one unsettling realization began to form. This was only the beginning of something far more calculated than anyone first believed. Before the name Black Dahlia existed, before she became a name tied to one of America's darkest unsolved murders, Elizabeth Short was simply a young woman trying to find her place in a world that rarely made things easy. She was born on July 29, 1924, in Massachusetts, growing up during the harsh years of the Great Depression. Life was unstable from the start. Financial struggles, constant uncertainty, and emotional loss shaped much of her early years. Her family faced deep hardship, especially after her father suddenly disappeared from their lives. Years later, it was revealed he was still alive, having chosen to walk away entirely. That abandonment left lasting emotional damage. Those who knew Elizabeth described her as beautiful, poised, and soft-spoken, but also someone carrying quiet sadness. She dreamed of something bigger than her surroundings. Like many young women of her time, she looked toward Hollywood as an escape. California represented reinvention, freedom, and the chance to become someone new. At 19, she traveled west, hoping to rebuild her life and reconnect with her father. Instead, she was rejected once again, forced to leave after a brief and painful reunion. That moment pushed her further into uncertainty, drifting between cities like Los Angeles, San Diego, and Santa Barbara. She worked small jobs, often as a waitress, staying in cheap rooms and temporary housing. Her life became a series of short stops and long searches for stability, connection, and identity. In 1943, she was briefly arrested for underage drinking in Santa Barbara. The police photograph taken during that arrest would later become one of the most recognizable images connected to her name. In it, she appears calm, composed, but unreadable, an expression that has been interpreted in countless ways since. By late 1946, she returned to Los Angeles again, still chasing opportunity despite everything she had been through. There was no sign she expected danger, no warning she understood the storm closing in. And yet, within weeks, she would vanish from sight completely. What happened in those final days remains one of the most disturbing gaps in the entire case, because whatever led her from a struggling life into that empty lot may hold the key to everything that followed. The last known sightings of Elizabeth Short, the final stretch of life for Elizabeth Short, remains one of the most confusing and fragmented parts of the entire case. Even decades later, investigators still cannot agree on a clear timeline of where she went or who she was with in the days leading up to her death. What exists instead are scattered, inconsistent witness accounts, each adding pieces that don't quite fit together. Some people recalled seeing her calm and social, moving through Los Angeles nightlife, talking with strangers, and appearing almost hopeful. Others described a completely different version, nervous, distracted, and uneasy, as if she was constantly looking over her shoulder. Her movements placed her across multiple locations in downtown Los Angeles. She was reportedly seen in hotels, restaurants, and bars, drifting through the city without a fixed destination. One of the last confirmed sightings placed her at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9, 1947. After that moment, the trail goes silent. For nearly 6 days, there is no verified record of where she stayed, who she contacted, or what she experienced. That gap has become one of the most unsettling mysteries in the entire investigation. Then, suddenly, everything ended. Her body was discovered in a vacant lot in Leimert Park by a passerby who initially mistook it for a mannequin. The truth, when it was finally recognized, shocked both police and the public. Even seasoned investigators were disturbed by the condition of the scene. It wasn't just the violence, it was the precision, the control, the strange sense that the crime had been staged rather than simply committed. And as detectives began piecing together the evidence, one realization became unavoidable. The final days of Elizabeth Short weren't just missing, they may have been deliberately erased. Which leads to a deeper question that investigators still struggle with today. What exactly happened during those silent days before her body was found? And who was with her when the trail went cold? How the Black Dahlia became a national obsession. The murder of Elizabeth Short did not stay a quiet police matter for long. Almost immediately, it exploded into a media phenomenon. Los Angeles newspapers raced to publish the most shocking details, each trying to outdo the other with darker headlines, dramatic wording, and sensational claims. Radio broadcasts followed, turning the case into a constant presence in everyday life. In homes, cafes, and streets, people discussed the murder endlessly, trying to make sense of the brutality and the mystery behind it. The story spread so fast that it stopped being just news. It became a cultural fixation. It was during this time that the nickname Black Dahlia took hold, reportedly inspired by the film The Blue Dahlia. The name stuck instantly. It sounded mysterious, cinematic, and unforgettable. But it also changed how the public saw Elizabeth. She was no longer just a young woman who had been killed. She became a symbol, a story, a legend. As attention grew, journalists began digging into her personal life, Friends, acquaintances, and past co-workers were interviewed repeatedly. Details were often exaggerated, rearranged, or taken out of context to make the story more gripping. Facts and rumors began to blur together until it became difficult to separate truth from fiction. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Police Department launched one of its largest investigations of the time. Hundreds of officers were assigned to the case, and federal assistance was also considered. Doctors and surgeons were questioned due to the precision of the injuries, and suspect lists expanded rapidly. But instead of narrowing the search, the chaos of attention made things worse. False leads poured in. Confessions from attention seekers and disturbed individuals flooded police desks. Every new headline created more noise than clarity. And as the pressure mounted, the investigation began to lose direction. Not because there were no clues, but because there were too many voices pulling it in every direction. What was supposed to be a search for truth was slowly turning into something else entirely. And behind the chaos, critical mistakes were already beginning to take shape. When the investigation started falling apart. In modern investigations, every detail matters. Crime scenes are sealed, evidence is protected, and even the smallest trace can become crucial. But in 1947, during the investigation of Elizabeth Short, those standards simply did not exist in the same way. And that gap would prove to be catastrophic. One of the earliest and most damaging failures came when the Los Angeles Examiner received a package containing personal belongings linked to Elizabeth. Inside were photographs, identification documents, and private items that clearly came from the victim herself. The implication was chilling. The sender was likely connected to the crime. But instead of being preserved for forensic analysis, the package was handled casually by newsroom staff. Items were touched, passed around, and even photographed before investigators had secured them. By the time police finally obtained the materials, any potential fingerprints or microscopic evidence may have already been destroyed. That single mistake alone may have erased critical answers. And it didn't stop there. The investigation was constantly undermined by leaks between law enforcement and the press. Sensitive details appeared in newspapers before detectives could properly analyze them. Witness identities became public, tips were influenced by media coverage, and rumors began to shape public perception of the case. Instead of clarity, the investigation became noise. Detectives were overwhelmed with false confessions, misleading leads, and constant public pressure. Every promising direction seemed to dissolve under the weight of misinformation. Over time, even serious evidence became harder to trust because it was impossible to know what had been contaminated or distorted. Years later, official reviews criticized the handling of the case, pointing out major procedural failures and lost opportunities. But by then, the damage was already irreversible. And through all of it, one truth remained unchanged. The killer of Elizabeth Short was never identified. But as investigators later shifted focus to overlooked suspects and hidden connections, one name began resurfacing again and again, a name that would take the case into even darker territory. The most controversial name in the case. Among all the names linked to the murder of Elizabeth Short, none has sparked more debate than George Hodel. On the surface, he appeared to be a highly educated physician with a successful career in Los Angeles. He moved in intellectual and artistic circles, attended social gatherings, and maintained an image of sophistication. But behind that public face, darker allegations began to emerge. Hodel worked as a doctor specializing in venereal diseases, a role that brought him into contact with many different social environments across the city. Over time, rumors about his private life began circulating, stories that painted him as secretive, controlling, and unpredictable. The situation escalated when serious accusations involving his own family surfaced, drawing police attention and intensifying suspicion. Although he was later cleared in court, The damage to his reputation was already done. What truly deepened the mystery was the decision by investigators to monitor him secretly. Police allegedly placed recording devices inside his home, an extraordinary move for the era. The house itself, the eerie Soden house, only added to the unsettling atmosphere surrounding him. Some recordings captured conversations that investigators later described as disturbing, even suggestive of hidden knowledge about the crime. Others dismissed them as unclear or open to interpretation. Still, despite years of suspicion, surveillance, and investigation, no charges were ever filed. And then, without warning, Hodel left the country and settled abroad, slipping further out of reach. But decades later, the case didn't end there. In fact, it was about to be re-examined from a completely different perspective, this time from within his own family. The son who reopened the case. Years after the Black Dahlia case had already been labeled one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries, a new voice stepped into the story, and it came from someone unexpected. Steve Hodel, a former homicide detective, began digging into the case not as an outsider, but as a son searching through the hidden layers of his own family history. What started as curiosity slowly turned into obsession. Old photographs, archived LAPD materials, and forgotten surveillance records began forming a pattern he could no longer ignore. The deeper he went, the more disturbing the connections became. According to his findings, his own father, Dr. George Hodel, wasn't just linked to suspicious behavior in Los Angeles during the 1940s, but may have been directly connected to Elizabeth Short's murder. Steve pointed to encrypted police recordings, architectural details of his father's home, and inconsistencies in official reports. To him, these weren't random fragments. They were pieces of a larger, darker puzzle. Whether seen as groundbreaking discovery or controversial theory, his investigation forced the world to look again at a case many thought was already closed. And it raised one final, unsettling question. How much truth was hiding inside the life of the man closest to the mystery all along? Because sometimes the most dangerous clues aren't found in crime scenes, but in family histories no one ever thought to question. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this investigation, like, share, and subscribe for more true crime mysteries and hidden evidence cases that challenge everything we think we know.